She cried losing her virginity to the Millionaire CEO, but whispered, "You were my hope." The last time I saw Bryan Hartley, I was lying beneath him, a virgin crying from overwhelm, whispering that he was my hope. The next morning, I woke up alone in his king-sized bed, and he erased me like I never existed. Sara Mitchell stood across from the man who destroyed her, 5 years of buried rage threatening to crack through her professional composure. Her voice shook as she leaned forward, hands gripping the conference table. "You want to know what happened to me after you disappeared, Bryan? I'll tell you exactly what happened. I woke up alone with your note saying you'd call later. I waited 3 days. You never called. I went to this building 4 times. Security wouldn't let me pass the lobby. I tried your number. Disconnected. You erased every trace of yourself from my life like I was a mistake that needed cleaning up." Bryan's face had gone pale, his knuckles white against the mahogany desk. "Sara, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That I gave you my virginity and you threw me away like trash? That I trusted you when you said I mattered, and the next day you proved I didn't? That I was stupid enough to believe a billionaire CEO could actually want a girl who cleaned his floors at 3 in the morning? Her voice cracked, 5 years of pain pouring out. "I lost my scholarship because of you. I failed my finals because I couldn't stop crying long enough to take the exams. I had to drop out and move back to the trailer park I'd been fighting my whole life to escape. I was 22 years old, broke, heartbroken, and convinced that girls like me don't get happy endings with men like you. We just get used and forgotten." Bryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think I forgot you? Sara, I've thought about you every single day for 5 years. I searched for you. I hired investigators. I went to the university. You disappeared, and I had no way to find you." She laughed bitterly. "You had every way to find me. You just didn't try hard enough because I didn't matter enough. Have you ever given everything to someone who made you feel seen for the first time in your life? Have you ever trusted someone with your body, your heart, your hope, only to wake up and realize you were completely alone? If you have, then you understand what I'm about to tell you. And if you haven't, pay attention, because this is what happens when you're invisible your whole life until one person looks at you like you're everything, then vanishes without a trace. But here's what that person didn't know. 5 years later, I wasn't that broken girl anymore. I walked back into his building as the CEO of a $60 million company, and he had absolutely no idea what was about to hit him. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after someone shattered you, if you've ever turned pain into power, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Mr. Dalton's Storyhouse, because this story is about to show you that the best revenge isn't hatred. It's becoming untouchable. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of what happens next. The conference room on the 52nd floor of Hartley Industries smelled like leather and ambition. The kind of space where billion-dollar deals were made with handshakes and calculated smiles, where people who mattered sat across from other people who mattered and decided the fate of companies, careers, entire industries. Sara Mitchell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline, her reflection sharp in the glass. Tailored charcoal suit that cost more than she used to make in 3 months. Auburn hair swept into a sleek twist that said she'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. Diamond studs in her ears, small but real, purchased with her own money from her own company's first major contract. She'd been 22 the last time she stood in this building. A scholarship student working overnight shifts as a cleaner to pay for textbooks and her mother's medical bills. Invisible to everyone who walked these halls in expensive suits and designer shoes. Invisible to everyone except the one man who'd looked at her like she mattered, the one man who'd unraveled her completely, then disappeared like smoke. Bryan Hartley. 5 years ago, he'd been 30 years old, newly appointed CEO of his father's tech empire after a decade of working his way up through every department, proving he'd earned the position through merit, not just inheritance. Brilliant and restless and carrying the kind of loneliness that comes from having everything except genuine connection. She'd been nobody. A girl from a trailer park in eastern Washington with straight A's and calloused hands, scrubbing floors in buildings she'd never belong in, studying computer science because it was the only path she could see out of generational poverty. Until the night everything changed. "Miss Mitchell?" The receptionist's voice cut through her thoughts, professional and polite. "Mr. Hartley is ready for you." Sara turned from the window, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the kind of confidence that comes from surviving the unsurvivable. From building an empire out of heartbreak and rage and the absolute refusal to stay broken. She'd practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times over 5 years. What she'd say if she ever saw him again. How she'd make him understand exactly what he'd done to her. How she'd prove that she didn't need him, had never needed him, that she'd become everything she was supposed to be despite him abandoning her when she needed him most. But now, walking toward his office, her heart was pounding so hard she wondered if everyone could hear it. The door opened. There he was. Bryan Hartley at 35 looked like time had touched him with reverence rather than cruelty. The same dark eyes that had once studied her like she was an equation he needed to solve. The same strong jaw, now shadowed with stubble that suggested he'd been up all night working. The same broad shoulders that had once felt like shelter before they became the source of her destruction. He stood when he saw her, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. Shock. Something that might have been pain or regret, or maybe just surprise. Sara. Her name in his mouth after 5 years of silence felt like a wound reopening. But she kept her expression neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Mr. Hartley, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I didn't realize. He stopped, visibly collecting himself. When my assistant said Mitchell Tech was sending their CEO for this partnership discussion, I didn't know it was you. Would you have refused the meeting if you had? Sara settled into the chair across from his massive desk, crossing her legs with deliberate composure. She watched him process the question, watched him try to find the right answer. No. He sat down slowly, like his legs wouldn't quite hold him. I just would have prepared differently. Prepared for what? The girl you slept with and forgot? Don't worry, Bryan. I'm not here to rehash ancient history or make you uncomfortable. I'm here because your company needs what mine has, and I'm willing to negotiate a partnership. That's all this is. Strictly business. The words were precise, surgical, designed to establish that she wasn't the vulnerable girl who'd whispered desperate hopes into his skin 5 years ago. She was someone else now. Someone harder. Someone who couldn't be hurt by him because she didn't care enough to feel anything at all. But Bryan was looking at her like he could see through the armor to the scar tissue beneath. You built Mitchell Tech. It wasn't a question, but Sara answered anyway. I did. I've been following your company for 2 years. The cybersecurity protocols you developed are revolutionary. End-to-end encryption that adapts to emerging threats in real time. You went from startup to a $60 million valuation in 4 years. The tech journals are calling you the future of cloud security. You've been doing your homework. Sara pulled a slim portfolio from her bag and slid it across his desk. Your company has been hemorrhaging clients because of security breaches. 3 major incidents in the last 18 months. Corporate espionage, data theft, customer information compromised. Your competitors are using your vulnerabilities as a selling point against you. Bryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. My team has developed encryption software that would make your cloud infrastructure virtually impenetrable. Adaptive algorithms that learn from attack patterns and evolve faster than hackers can adapt. Integration would take 6 months, full implementation in a year. The partnership terms are outlined in the proposal. Read it, consult with your board, and let me know your decision by Friday. She stood to leave, desperate to escape before the careful control she'd cultivated started cracking. Before 5 years of buried pain started forcing its way to the surface. Wait. Bryan's voice stopped her at the door. Please, just wait. Sara turned, one hand on the door handle, her escape route mapped and ready. 5 years, Sara. 5 years, and I've thought about you every single day. Wondered where you were, if you were okay, if you hated me as much as I hated myself for what I did to you. Don't do this. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Don't make this about us, when there was never an us. There was just you, slumming with the help for a few weeks until you remembered who you were and what I wasn't. That's not what happened. Then what did happen, Bryan? Sara felt something inside her snap. 5 years of carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of unresolved pain. Because from where I stood, you spent 3 weeks making me believe I mattered. You found me crying over a chemistry textbook at 2 a.m. in your office. You asked why I was there, why I was upset. You started staying late, bringing me coffee, helping me study. You made me laugh for the first time in months. You made me feel seen. Her voice was rising now, 5 years of silence breaking like a dam. And then one night, you kissed me. And I was stupid enough, hopeful enough, desperate enough to believe it meant something. So when you asked, when you looked at me like I was precious instead of disposable, I gave you everything. I let you take me to your apartment. I let you undress me like I was something sacred. I gave you my virginity even though I was terrified because you felt like hope, Bryan. Like maybe someone like you could want someone like me, and that would mean I wasn't going to be trapped in poverty forever. The memory crashed over her, lying in his king-size bed with sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Her body trembling, tears sliding down her temples as he moved inside her with careful gentleness. The pain had been sharp but bearable. The emotional overwhelm had been everything. You were my hope. She'd whispered it against his shoulder as she cried, her arms tight around him, her heart cracked open and bleeding trust into his hands. You were my hope. He'd held her afterward, stroked her hair, whispered that she was beautiful, that he had her, that everything would be okay, that she mattered, that this meant something. She'd believed him. I woke up alone. Sara's voice broke on the words. You left a note saying something important came up, that you'd call me later. I waited all day. You never called. I tried your number. Disconnected. I came to this building 3 times. Security wouldn't let me pass the lobby. You erased me like I was a mistake that needed cleaning up. Sara, please. I lost my scholarship. The words came out raw, unfiltered. Did you know that? I was so devastated I missed my finals. Failed 2 classes, lost my full ride. I had to drop out, move back to that trailer park I'd been fighting so hard to escape. I was 22 years old, heartbroken, broke, and convinced I'd been right all along. That girls like me don't get fairy tale endings with men like you. We just get used and forgotten. Bryan's face had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I didn't know. Sara, I swear, I didn't know any of that. You didn't ask. You just disappeared. My father had a stroke that morning. The word stopped Sara cold. I woke up to 17 missed calls from my mother. I drove straight to the hospital, and he died 6 hours later. Then my mother had a complete breakdown. The company was in chaos. The board wanted to push me out, said I was too young, too inexperienced. I was fighting on 17 fronts simultaneously, trying to keep everything from collapsing while processing the fact that my father was gone and I never got to say goodbye. Sara felt the first crack in her righteous anger, but she didn't let it show. I didn't know that. How could you? I shut down completely, changed my number because I couldn't handle the condolence calls. Every time the phone rang, it was someone else offering sympathy I didn't want, or circling to see if they could benefit from my father's death. I buried myself in work because grief felt like drowning, and the company was the only life raft I had. He stood, moving around the desk but keeping distance between them, like he understood she'd bolt if he came too close. By the time I came up for air 3 months later, I tried to find you. I went to the university. They said you'd withdrawn, no forwarding information. I hired a private investigator. Sara Mitchell is a common name, and you disappeared completely. I searched for 2 years before I finally accepted that you were gone, and I'd never get the chance to explain or apologize or tell you that you weren't what I regretted. Losing you was. Sara wanted to hold on to her anger. Anger was safe. Anger had fueled her for 5 years, pushed her to build an empire just to prove she wasn't the disposable girl he'd left behind. But looking at Bryan now, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes, the grief he still carried, her anger began shifting into something more complicated. You should have found a way. Her voice was quieter now, the sharp edges worn down. Even drowning, even grieving, you should have found a way to tell me I wasn't just a mistake you regretted. You were never a mistake. Bryan's voice was rough with emotion he was trying to contain. You were the best thing that happened to me in the worst period of my life. You were light and hope and proof the connection still existed outside of boardrooms and hostile takeovers. You challenged me, made me laugh, made me want to be better than I was, and I destroyed that because I was too broken to handle my own life, let alone honor what we had. We didn't have anything. Sara forced the words out, needing them to be true. We had 3 weeks. We had 3 weeks where I felt more myself than I'd felt in years. 3 weeks where I looked forward to nighttime because it meant I'd see you. 3 weeks where you made me believe that success and genuine connection weren't mutually exclusive. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. That night, Sara, when you told me you'd never been with anyone, I almost stopped. I was terrified of hurting you, but you looked at me and said you wanted it to be me because I felt like hope. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it meant that someone like you, someone real and brilliant and fighting so hard for a better life, saw something in me worth hoping for. Don't romanticize it. Sara's voice shook. You left. That's the only part that matters. Whatever you felt, whatever it meant to you, you still left me alone and never looked back. I looked back every day for 5 years. Then you didn't look hard enough. The words hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. Bryan absorbed them with visible pain, his composure cracking in ways she remembered from 5 years ago. When he'd let his guard down and shown her the loneliness beneath the success, the pressure of living up to impossible expectations, the exhaustion of always being watched, judged, measured against his father's legacy. She'd seen the real him. And then he'd vanished, and she'd convinced herself that the real him had been a performance designed to get her into bed. Your partnership proposal. Bryan gestured to the portfolio on his desk, visibly trying to regain some semblance of professional control. It's brilliant. Your encryption protocols are exactly what we need. But before we discuss business, I need to know something. Can you be in the same room with me without it destroying you? Because if working together is going to hurt you, I'll decline. I'll send you to our competitors with a personal recommendation. Your success matters more than what my company needs. Sara studied him, this man who'd been her fantasy and her devastation, now offering to sacrifice a deal his company desperately needed for her emotional well-being. I can handle it. She straightened her shoulders, rebuilding her professional armor. I'm not the scared 22-year-old you knew. I built myself into someone who doesn't break easily. I can see that. Bryan's voice was soft, almost reverent. You're extraordinary, Sara. You always were, but now the whole world can see it. Don't. Sara's voice carried a warning edge. Don't compliment me like we're picking up where we left off. If we do this partnership, it's purely professional. You're a potential business associate, nothing more. Agreed. Whatever you need. They spent the next hour discussing technical specifications, implementation timelines, and financial terms. Sara presented her case with precision, and Bryan countered with thoughtful questions that proved he'd actually studied her company's work. They negotiated like the skilled executives they'd both become, finding middle ground on pricing and contract length, discussing integration challenges and risk mitigation strategies. It felt safe, this business discussion. No emotions, just strategy and mutual benefit. Sara could handle this version of Bryan. The CEO across the table, making calculated decisions. This didn't require her to examine the complicated tangle of feelings she'd been working very hard to ignore. Your encryption adaptive learning protocols. Bryan pulled up technical schematics on his laptop. The speed at which they evolve is impressive, but what about resource consumption? Adaptive algorithms can be processing intensive. We've optimized for efficiency. Sara leaned forward, pointing to specific data points. The algorithms learn during low traffic periods, implementing updates when system load is minimal. Resource consumption averages 3%, well within acceptable parameters for enterprise infrastructure. And the fail-safes? If the adaptive learning identifies a false positive as a threat, multi-layered verification before any access restriction is implemented. Human oversight at critical decision points. We've run it through 10,000 simulated attack scenarios. 0 false lockouts. Bryan nodded slowly, clearly impressed. You've thought of everything. I had to. I was building this company with limited capital and no margin for error. Every protocol had to be perfect because I couldn't afford the luxury of failure. There was an edge to her words. A reminder that while he'd been running an empire with unlimited resources and a safety net, she'd been building hers with nothing but determination and the burning need to prove she was more than the girl he'd thrown away. Sara. Bryan's voice softened. I know you think I don't understand what you accomplished, but I do. I've watched your trajectory. Started with a $3,000 business loan and a one-room office. No investors, no connections, nothing but your own brilliance and work ethic. You built Mitchell Tech into a major player in cybersecurity through sheer force of will. That's not just impressive, it's extraordinary. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has choices. You chose to fight instead of giving up. You chose to learn instead of staying bitter. You chose to build instead of destroy. Those were choices, Sara, and they say everything about who you are. Before Sara could respond, there was a knock on the door. Bryan's assistant poked her head in, apologetic. Mr. Hartley, your 4 o'clock is here. The Children's Hospital Board meeting? Reschedule it. Bryan didn't even look up from the documents they were reviewing. Sir, this is the 3rd time you've rescheduled. The board is getting concerned. Then tell them I have a meeting that takes priority. We'll reconvene next week." After the assistant left, Sara raised an eyebrow. Children's Hospital Board? Bryan looked almost embarrassed, like he'd been caught doing something he didn't want credit for. "I chair a foundation that provides medical care for uninsured kids, free treatment, experimental therapies, whatever they need. We're building a new pediatric cancer wing. Since when do you do charity work? Since I realize that having wealth means nothing if you're not using it to help people who started where you didn't." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I grew up with every advantage, Sara. Private schools, trust funds, a path cleared before I could even walk. You fought for everything. That night when I found you crying over chemistry, and you told me about working 3 jobs while carrying 18 credit hours, about taking care of your mother, about being the first person in your family attempting a college degree, it changed something in me, made me see how much I'd taken for granted. So you started a foundation to absolve yourself of guilt for abandoning the poor girl." The words came out harsher than Sara intended, but she didn't take them back. "I started a foundation because you made me want to be someone worthy of how you saw me that night." Bryan's voice was quiet but steady, like I was good, not just successful, like I could be more than my father's empire and shareholder expectations. "You saw potential in me that had nothing to do with money or power, and even after I destroyed any right to that perspective, I wanted to prove I could have been the man you believed I was. Don't put that on me. I'm not your moral compass, no, but you were my catalyst, the person who made me question whether the life I was living was actually worth living." The meeting ended with a handshake and an agreement to have their respective legal teams draft formal contracts. Professional, courteous, completely devoid of the emotional warfare that had dominated the first 30 minutes. But as Sara gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she felt Bryan following her to the door. "Can I ask you something?" His voice stopped her with her hand on the door handle. "Not as potential business partners, just as someone who once knew you. That depends on the question. Are you happy?" The question caught her completely off guard, cutting through all the professional pretense to something vulnerable underneath. "I'm successful." Sara kept her voice carefully neutral. "That's not what I asked." She turned to face him, and the expression on his face was so earnest, so genuinely concerned about her well-being, that it made her chest tighten. "I'm content. I have a company I built from nothing, employees who depend on me, proof that I'm more than where I came from." "That's enough. Is it?" "It has to be." The words came out before Sara could stop them, more honest than she'd intended. "Why?" "Because happiness is a luxury I can't afford. Happiness requires vulnerability, and vulnerability gets you hurt. I learned that lesson 5 years ago. Contentment is safer. Success is measurable. I can control those things. I can't control whether someone decides I matter enough to stay." Bryan's face crumpled slightly, like her words had physically hurt him. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that what I did made you believe you have to choose safety over joy. That's not living, Sara. That's just surviving. Surviving is what I'm good at. You deserve more than survival, maybe. But deserving something and getting it are 2 very different things." Sara pulled open the door, needing to escape before this conversation stripped away any more of her carefully constructed armor. "I'll have my team send over additional technical documentation by tomorrow. Your legal department can start reviewing the contract terms." "Sara." His voice stopped her again, and she cursed herself for pausing. "Can we have dinner? Not business. Just 2 people who used to know each other, seeing if they can be in the same room without it being painful." "We were never just 2 people, Bryan. There was always a massive power imbalance. You were a billionaire CEO. I was the girl cleaning your floors. You were never just anything to me. Then what was I?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 5 years of unresolved pain. "You were the person who made me feel human again, who laughed at my jokes and challenged my assumptions and made me want to be better, who saw past the money and the name and the pressure and just wanted to know me, the real me, not the version I performed for everyone else. And then you threw that away." "I didn't throw it away. I failed to protect it when everything in my life exploded. There's a difference." "Is there?" Sara studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or empty words designed to make himself feel better. "Because the result was the same. I was alone and broken and convinced I didn't matter. You mattered. You matter now, and if you give me a chance, I'll spend however long it takes proving that to you. I don't need you to prove anything to me. I proved my own worth by building a life that doesn't need you in it." I know you don't need me. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me know who you are now. Not the girl I knew 5 years ago, but the woman you've become. Just dinner. Just conversation. No expectations beyond seeing if we can be civil. Sara wanted to say no. Every instinct she'd cultivated over 5 years screamed at her to maintain boundaries, keep distance, protect herself from any possibility of being hurt by him again. But there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability she recognized because she'd worn it herself 5 years ago. The look of someone who'd lost something precious and would do anything for one more chance. One dinner. The words came out before her rational mind could intervene. But Bryan, if this is some attempt to revisit the past or finish what we started, you should know I'm not interested. I don't do second chances with people who've already proven they can destroy me. It's not, I promise, just dinner between two people, figuring out if they can exist in the same space without it being toxic. Fine. Friday night, 7 o'clock. You choose the place, somewhere quiet, where we won't be interrupted by people wanting to network or impress you. Done. I'll text you the details. You don't have my number. I'll have my assistant get it from your office. Of course you will. Sara shook her head, something that might have been a smile tugging at her lips, despite her best efforts. Friday, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I won't. Sara left his office and managed to maintain her composure all the way to the elevator, through the lobby, out to her rental car. But once she was alone, she gripped the steering wheel and let out a shaky breath that felt like 5 years of tension releasing all at once. She'd done it. Faced him. Told him exactly what he'd done to her. Established professional boundaries. Proven she wasn't the broken girl he'd left behind. So why did she feel like she'd just stepped onto a path that would either heal her completely or destroy her all over again? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's Bryan. Friday, 7 p.m. Alessio's on Pine Street. Private room in the back. I'll make sure we're not disturbed. Thank you for giving me this chance, Sara. I know I don't deserve it. She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Actions, not words. See you Friday. Short, professional, giving nothing away about the fact that her heart was pounding and her hands were shaking, and she had absolutely no idea if she'd just made the best decision or the worst mistake of her life. Before we go further, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear isn't a fairy tale about instant forgiveness or easy reconciliation. This is the messy, complicated truth about what happens when someone who hurt you shows back up in your life claiming they've changed, about whether people can actually transform, or if they just get better at hiding who they've always been. If you're feeling Sara's pain right now, if you've ever been left without explanation by someone who made you believe you mattered, drop a comment telling me your story. Share this video with someone who's rebuilding themselves from heartbreak, and subscribe to Mr. Dalton's Story House, because what happens next will test everything you think you know about second chances, forgiveness, and whether broken trusts can ever truly be repaired. Because here's the truth. Sara walked out of that building thinking she was in control, thinking she could handle a business partnership and maybe a friendship without risking her heart. But what she didn't know was that Bryan Hartley wasn't the same man who'd left her 5 years ago. And the version of himself he'd become was going to challenge every wall she'd built, every belief she'd formed about her own worth, and every assumption she'd made about what was possible when two broken people tried to build something new from the wreckage of what destroyed them. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work that Sara used to avoid thinking about Friday night. She buried herself in code, reviewed contract proposals, led team meetings about their expansion into European markets. Anything to keep her mind occupied and away from the dangerous territory of hope. But late at night, alone in her downtown apartment, the memories crept in. 5 years ago, 22 years old, working the overnight cleaning shift at Hartley Industries because the pay was better than daytime work and it didn't conflict with her class schedule. Moving through empty offices with industrial vacuum and cleaning supplies, invisible to the people who worked there during business hours. She'd been in Bryan's office, dusting bookshelves, when she'd seen her chemistry textbook on the cleaning cart and made the mistake of opening it. Trying to study between offices, trying to make every minute count because there were never enough hours in the day. The chapter on thermodynamics had made her want to cry. She'd failed the last quiz, was barely hanging on in a class that was required for her major, had been up for 20 hours straight between classes, her shift at the campus library, taking care of her mother who'd been too sick to work, and now this cleaning job. The numbers on the page had blurred, and before she could stop it, she'd been crying. Silent tears of exhaustion and fear, and the overwhelming weight of trying to hold everything together when it felt like the universe was actively working against her. "Why are you crying?" The voice had made her jump, nearly knocking over her cleaning supplies. She'd spun around to find Bryan Hartley standing in his office doorway at 2 a.m, looking exhausted and rumpled, and nothing like the polished CEO she'd seen in company photos. "I'm sorry. I'll leave." She'd started gathering her things, mortified at being caught crying, terrified she'd get fired for being unprofessional. "Wait. Please. I'm not upset. I just want to know if you're okay. I'm fine. Just tired." She'd wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together. "You're studying chemistry?" He gestured to her textbook. "At 2 a.m. in my office?" "I study between cleaning. I don't have a lot of free time during the day." "What year are you?" "Junior. Computer science major. Chemistry is required, and I'm failing." She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe because it was 2 a.m, and he looked as exhausted as she felt, and there was something in his eyes that seemed genuinely concerned, rather than judgmental. "I took chemistry in undergrad. Hated it." "What's giving you trouble?" "Thermodynamics. I don't understand the formulas." Bryan had walked over, looked at her textbook, then spent the next hour explaining entropy and enthalpy and energy systems in ways that actually made sense. He'd been patient. Funny, breaking down complex concepts into understandable pieces. By the time he'd finished, Sara had understood more than she'd learned in 6 weeks of lectures. "Thank you. That actually helped. Anytime. I'm here late most nights anyway. If you need help studying, just knock." He'd smiled, and it had transformed his whole face from intimidatingly handsome to approachable and kind. "Why are you here at 2 a.m? She'd asked before she could stop herself. "Building an empire, apparently. Or trying to. My father has very specific expectations about productivity." "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission had been quiet, honest, and Sara had seen something in his face that she recognized. The exhaustion of always fighting, always trying to prove you belonged somewhere you weren't sure wanted you. After that night, Bryan had started staying late more often. Always when Sara was cleaning his floor, bringing her coffee, helping her study, asking about her life, her goals, what she wanted beyond just surviving. She'd fallen for him slowly, each conversation revealing more of the person beneath the CEO title. He was brilliant but uncertain, successful but isolated, carrying the weight of impossible expectations while wondering if any of it actually mattered. And she'd been stupid enough to think that connection meant something. That when he looked at her like she was fascinating instead of invisible, it was real. The night he'd kissed her, 3 weeks after that first conversation, Sara had felt like the universe had finally stopped punishing her and started offering hope. They'd been in his office, 2:30 a.m. She'd aced her chemistry exam, gotten her first A in the class, run to tell him because he was the only person who'd understand what it meant. "I aced it. 94%. Professor said it was the highest score in the class." "Sara, that's incredible. I knew you could do it." He'd stood from his desk, pulled her into a hug that had lasted longer than appropriate. And when he'd pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders, he'd looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. Then he'd kissed her. Soft at first, tentative, giving her space to pull away. But Sara had leaned in, fisted her hands in his expensive shirt, kissed him back like he was oxygen and she'd been drowning. When they'd finally broken apart, both breathing hard, Bryan had pressed his forehead to hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks, but I didn't want to cross a line or make you uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable." "Good. Because Sara, you're the best part of my days. Every day. And I know this is complicated, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. I feel it too." She'd whispered it like a confession. A week later, he'd asked her to dinner, taken her to a beautiful restaurant where the prices weren't listed on the menu, and she'd felt completely out of place in her thrift store dress. But Bryan had made her feel seen, asked about her dreams beyond just graduating, what she wanted to do with computer science, what kind of life she imagined for herself. Security software, she'd told him, feeling vulnerable, admitting her ambitions. Systems that protect people's information. So much of our lives are digital now, and most security protocols are outdated or ineffective. "I want to build something better." "You will. You're brilliant, Sara. Once you graduate, you're going to revolutionize the field." "You really think so?" "I know so. You see problems differently than other people. Find solutions no one else considers. That's innovation. After dinner, they'd walked through Seattle, the city quiet at night. Just the two of them, and endless conversation. He'd told her about the pressure of living up to his father's legacy, the loneliness of success, the fear that everyone wanted something from him and nobody actually knew him. "I know you." She'd said it with certainty. The real you. Not the CEO or the billionaire or the perfect son. The person who stays up until 3 a.m. because work is easier than dealing with feelings. Who hates thermodynamics, but understands it perfectly. Who wants to matter for who he is, not what he has. Bryan had stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "How do you see me so clearly?" "Because I understand what it's like to be invisible until you prove you're valuable." "We're not that different, Bryan. You're fighting to prove you're more than your father's name. I'm fighting to prove I'm more than my circumstances. We're both trying to be seen for who we actually are. Come home with me." He'd said it quietly, and Sara had known exactly what he was asking. "Bryan, I've never, with anyone. I don't know if I'm ready. We don't have to do anything. I just want more time with you. Away from public spaces where we have to pretend this is casual." She'd agreed, gone to his penthouse apartment that overlooked the entire city, sat on his couch drinking wine and talking until the conversation had shifted into kissing, and his hands had been in her hair, and she'd been pulled into his lap. "Sara." He'd pulled back, breathing hard. "If we keep going, I'm not going to want to stop. So you need to tell me now if this isn't what you want." "It is what I want." She'd been terrified but certain. "You feel like hope, Bryan. Like maybe I'm not going to be stuck in poverty forever. Like maybe someone like you could want someone like me, and that means the universe isn't completely cruel. I do want you. So much it scares me." He'd carried her to his bedroom, undressed her slowly, like she was precious. When she'd started shaking, he'd stopped. "We can wait. There's no rush. I don't want to wait. I'm just scared. Of me. Of this mattering more to me than it does to you. Sara, this matters. You matter. I promise." She'd believed him. The sex had hurt at first, sharp pain that made her gasp against his shoulder. But he'd been gentle, moved slowly, whispered reassurances, and eventually the pain had faded into something else. Not pleasure exactly, but connection, intimacy, the feeling of being completely vulnerable with another person and trusting them not to destroy you. Afterward, she'd cried, not from pain, but from emotional overwhelm, from the magnitude of what she'd just given him. "You were my hope." She'd whispered it against his shoulder, arms tight around him. "You were my hope." He'd held her, stroked her hair, told her she was beautiful and brave, and everything he'd been looking for without knowing what he needed. She'd fallen asleep in his arms, feeling safe for the first time in her life, and woken up alone. The note had been on his pillow, handwritten on expensive stationery. Something important came up. Had to leave urgently. "I'll call you later. Last night was incredible. You're incredible. B." She'd waited, all day, checking her phone obsessively. He never called. By day 3, she'd gone to Hartley Industries. Security wouldn't let her past the lobby. Said Mr. Hartley wasn't available and they couldn't give out information about his schedule. She'd tried his number. Disconnected. By week 2, devastation had turned into humiliation. She'd given him her virginity, and he'd disappeared. She was exactly the cliché she'd promised herself she'd never become. The poor girl who thought she mattered to the rich man, only to discover she was just a conquest. The heartbreak had consumed her. She'd stopped going to classes, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, cried until she had no tears left. When finals came, she'd tried to pull herself together, but sitting in the exam room, looking at questions she couldn't focus on, she'd failed. Spectacularly. 2 classes. Enough to drop her GPA below the scholarship requirement. The letter had come 2 weeks later. Scholarship revoked due to academic performance. She had 1 semester to bring her grades up, or she'd lose her funding permanently. But she'd had no money for another semester. No way to pay tuition. No way to keep fighting. She'd dropped out. Moved back to the trailer park. Spent 3 months in a depression so deep she'd wondered if she'd ever feel normal again. Until the anger came. And the anger had saved her. Now, 5 years later, standing in her expensive apartment that she'd paid for with her own success, Sara didn't know if agreeing to dinner with Bryan was brave or stupid. But Friday night came anyway, whether she was ready or not. Part 2, 9,500 words. Alessio's was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise. The kind of place where reservations were made months in advance and cameras weren't allowed. Old money and new power meeting over Italian cuisine that cost more per plate than Sara used to make in a week. She arrived exactly on time, wearing a navy dress that struck the balance between professional and elegant. Not trying too hard, not giving him the satisfaction of thinking she'd spent hours preparing for this, even though she had. Bryan was already there, waiting in the private room he'd reserved. He stood when she entered, and Sara noticed he wasn't wearing a suit. Just dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look younger, more approachable, less like a CEO, and more like the man she'd known 5 years ago. "Sara." He moved to pull out her chair, and she let him, settling into it with practiced grace. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I said I would. I keep my commitments." The words carried weight they both understood. "Unlike some people," was the unspoken addition. A waiter appeared with wine, poured for both of them, then disappeared with promises to return when they were ready to order. The room fell silent. 5 years of unspoken words sitting between them like a physical presence. "This is awkward." Sara took a sip of wine, decided honesty was easier than pretense. "Incredibly awkward." Bryan agreed, and something about his admission made her relax fractionally. "How do we do this? Make small talk about the weather? Pretend we're strangers meeting for the first time? We could start with why you really asked me here. And don't say to see if we can be civil. You could have determined that through email." Bryan set down his wine glass, met her eyes directly. "I asked you here because I've spent 5 years wondering who you became, what your life looks like, if you're happy, if you ever think about me, or if I'm just a bad memory you've buried. I wanted to see you in a context that isn't business, where we're not performing our professional roles and just talk like two people who once knew each other. We never really knew each other, Bryan. We had 3 weeks. 3 weeks where I told you things I'd never told anyone, where you saw parts of me I kept hidden from everyone else." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You knew me better in 3 weeks than people who've been in my life for decades. That's not nothing. And then you disappeared, which proved it was nothing." Sara kept her voice level, refusing to let old pain bleed through. "We're going in circles. You asked me here to move forward, so let's try that. Tell me something about your life now. Something real." Bryan considered her request, then began. 3 years ago, I had a panic attack in the middle of a board meeting. Full breakdown. Couldn't breathe, thought I was dying. Paramedics, hospital, the whole humiliating experience. Sara felt her eyebrows raise. This wasn't what she'd expected. What caused it? Years of suppressed grief and unprocessed trauma, according to the therapist I started seeing afterward. I'd spent 3 years since my father died burying everything, working 90-hour weeks, refusing to feel anything because feeling meant pain and pain meant weakness. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My father raised me to believe emotions were character flaws, that successful men controlled their feelings, never showed vulnerability, never admitted to struggling. So I didn't. I just pushed everything down and worked harder and pretended I was fine until my body literally forced me to stop. What happened after the panic attack? 6 months of intensive therapy, learning that suppressing emotions doesn't make them go away, it just makes them come out in destructive ways. Processing my father's death, processing the guilt I carried about you, about my mother's breakdown, and how I'd failed to support her because I was too busy trying to save the company, about building an empire while feeling completely empty inside. And now I'm in therapy twice a month. I've learned to identify what I'm feeling instead of just pushing through. I've restructured my work schedule to include actual time off. I started the Children's Hospital Foundation because giving back makes me feel like my success has purpose beyond just accumulating wealth. He met her eyes. I'm trying to be the kind of person who doesn't run when things get hard, who stays and deals with difficulty instead of shutting down. I'll probably be working on that for the rest of my life, but at least I'm aware of it now. Sara absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man across from her with the one who'd disappeared 5 years ago. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked for something real, and that's the realest thing about me. I'm someone who's trying very hard not to repeat the patterns that destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I wasn't the best thing that ever happened to you. I was a 3-week relationship that ended badly. You were the person who made me feel human instead of just functional. The person who challenged me to be better. The person whose loss taught me that success means nothing if you achieve it by sacrificing every genuine connection in your life." The waiter returned, and they ordered, without really looking at the menu. After he left, Sara decided it was her turn for honesty. You want to know what happened to me after you left? Yes, everything. Even the parts that make me look worse than I already do. I spent 3 months clinically depressed. Couldn't get out of bed most days. My mother tried to help, but she was dealing with her own health issues, and we couldn't afford therapy, so I just sat with it. The grief, the humiliation, the absolute certainty that I'd been right all along about not deserving good things. Sara. His voice cracked, but she continued. Then one day, I woke up angry, furious at you for leaving, furious at myself for believing you, furious at a world where men like you got to destroy women like me without consequences, and I decided that anger was more useful than sadness. What did you do? Got a job doing customer service at a tech startup. Terrible pay, long hours, but they had computers I could use. I taught myself advanced coding at night, using free online courses. Within 6 months, I was better than their entire development team. She took a drink of wine, remembering. I started developing security protocols in my spare time, encryption algorithms that adapted to threats instead of just blocking known attack patterns. Brought them to my boss, suggested the company could use them. He dismissed me, said customer service reps didn't have ideas worth implementing. So you quit. So I quit. Took my protocols and $3,000 I'd saved and started Mitchell Tech in a one-room office that was really just a closet with a window. For the first year, I worked 100-hour weeks, lived on ramen and coffee, slept under my desk more nights than I slept in my apartment. But you made it work. I made it work because failure meant proving everyone right, that I was just trailer trash trying to play in a world I didn't belong in, that you were right to throw me away. I'd rather have died than prove those things true. You were never trash. You were never someone to throw away. The fact that you believe that breaks my heart. Well, that's what happens when you give someone your virginity and they disappear. You internalize that maybe you weren't worth staying for. The words hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. Bryan looked like he wanted to respond, but Sara wasn't finished. But here's what you need to understand, Bryan. That heartbreak was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it made me angry enough to fight, strong enough to build something that couldn't be taken away. It taught me that the only person I could rely on was myself, and that lesson made me into someone who doesn't need rescue or validation or anything from anyone. Is that really how you want to live? Not needing anything from anyone? It's safe. Need makes you vulnerable. Vulnerability gets you hurt. It also makes you human. Connection requires vulnerability. Love requires risk. Joy requires opening yourself up to the possibility of pain. I tried that once. Didn't work out well for me. Because I failed you. But Sara, one person's failure doesn't mean you should close yourself off forever. Their food arrived, providing a natural break in the intensity. They ate in silence for a few minutes, both processing. Finally, Bryan spoke again. Can I ask you something? About that night? Sara tensed but nodded. When you said I was your hope, what did you mean? Exactly what it sounded like. You represented the possibility that I could be more than my circumstances. That someone successful and brilliant could see value in me meant maybe I wasn't destined to repeat my mother's life. Working minimum wage, barely surviving, trapped in a cycle I couldn't break. She set down her fork, meeting his eyes. You made me feel like I had potential beyond just surviving. Like maybe I could build something meaningful. Like maybe I deserved good things. That's a powerful feeling when you've spent your whole life being invisible. And then I took that hope and destroyed it. Then you destroyed it. Yes, I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but Sara, I'm so profoundly sorry for what I did to you. For making you feel disposable when you were precious. For being too broken to handle my own crisis without destroying you in the process. For not fighting harder to find you. For every moment of pain I caused. His voice was thick with emotion. If I could go back, I'd do everything differently. I'd tell you about my father before sleeping with you. I'd leave you my mother's number as backup. I'd hire someone to check on you when I couldn't. I'd find a way to communicate even through the worst of it. But I can't go back. I can only try to be better now. Apologies don't erase the past. No, but they're a starting place for building a different future. They finished dinner discussing safer topics. Her company's expansion plans, his foundation's new initiatives, the changing tech landscape. It was easier, this professional discussion. less emotionally fraught. By the time dessert arrived, some of the tension had eased. This wasn't as terrible as I expected, Sara admitted as she finished her tiramisu. High praise. Bryan smiled, and it transformed his face into something warm and genuine. I'll take it. We can probably work together without it being destructive. The partnership makes sense for both companies. Just the partnership? His voice was careful, not pushing but clearly asking for more. What else would there be? Friendship, maybe. Two people who share history learning to be in each other's lives in a healthy way. Sara considered this. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to keep him at professional distance, to protect herself from any possibility of being hurt again. But looking at him now, seeing the genuine effort he'd made to change, to understand himself, to be better, she found herself wavering. We can try friendship. Slowly, with clear boundaries. But Bryan, you need to understand that I'm not the girl you knew. I don't trust easily. I don't forgive quickly. And if you let me down again, there won't be another chance. I understand. And I won't let you down. We'll see. Over the next 6 weeks, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Business meetings twice a week to discuss the partnership implementation. Occasional dinners after, where they'd talk about everything except the elephant in the room. Their lawyers negotiated contracts while Sara and Bryan negotiated the boundaries of whatever they were becoming to each other. Sara noticed things about him that were different from before. The way he talked about his therapy homework without embarrassment. How he'd mentioned feeling anxious or overwhelmed instead of just pushing through. The conscious effort he made to be present in conversations instead of checking his phone constantly. He's changed, her assistant Melissa observed after sitting in on a particularly long technical meeting. People don't really change, Sara replied automatically, but the words felt less certain than they used to. Maybe not fundamentally, but they can learn better coping mechanisms. He seems like he's doing the work, or he's just gotten better at performing. You don't really believe that? Melissa gave her a knowing look. I've watched you in meetings with him. You relax around him, laugh at his jokes. You wouldn't do that if you thought it was all performance. I'm being professional. You're being human, which is good. You've spent 5 years being invincible. Maybe it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable sometimes. Vulnerability is how you get hurt. It's also how you connect. But what do I know? I'm just the assistant who's watched you build an empire while refusing to let anyone close. Sara wanted to argue, but Melissa wasn't wrong. In 5 years, she'd built a successful company and maintained exactly 0 significant relationships. Friendly with her employees, but not friends. Respected by her peers, but isolated. She'd told herself it was because she was focused on success. But really, it was because she was terrified of being hurt again. A month into their tentative friendship, Bryan invited her to tour the Children's Hospital Foundation. She agreed, curious about this part of his life he kept mentioning. The pediatric cancer wing was still under construction, but the existing facility was impressive. State-of-the-art equipment, bright, cheerful rooms designed to feel less clinical and more hopeful. Staff who clearly adored the kids they were treating. Mr. Hartley, a small, bald girl, maybe 8 years old, ran up and hugged him. You came. I promised I would, didn't I? How was your treatment this week? Okay. The medicine makes me tired, but Dr. Sara says I'm responding well. That's great news, Emma. This is my friend Sara. She's brilliant with computers. Are you a hacker? Emma asked with wide eyes. Kind of. I build systems that keep hackers out. That's so cool. I want to learn about computers. When I'm better, I'm going to study engineering. You absolutely should. Women engineers change the world. After Emma returned to her room, Bryan showed Sara the plans for the new wing. Expanded treatment facilities. Family accommodation so parents could stay close. Recreational spaces for long-term patients. You're really committed to this. It's the only thing I do that feels genuinely meaningful. Everything else is just moving money around. This actually helps people. How did you choose pediatric cancer specifically? My father died of cancer. Pancreatic. He had access to the best treatment money could buy, and it still killed him in 6 months. I kept thinking about families who couldn't afford any treatment at all. Kids who die simply because their parents didn't have money. It felt obscene. He paused by a window overlooking the children's play area. You said I was your hope. That night, these kids are mine. Proof that wealth can have purpose beyond just accumulating more wealth. Sara felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't performance. This was genuine conviction. Real purpose that went beyond ego or image. You're a good person, Bryan. The words came out before she could stop them. I'm trying to be. Most days I'm not sure I'm succeeding, but I'm trying. That's more than most people do. They had dinner after the hospital tour, and for the first time, Sara found herself genuinely enjoying his company without the protective barriers she usually maintained. They talked about childhood. Hers in the trailer park learning to be invisible. His in a mansion learning to perform perfection. Both lonely in different ways. Both shaped by the weight of expectations they couldn't quite meet. I used to think we had nothing in common, Sara admitted over dessert. Poor girl, rich boy. Totally different worlds, but we're both intimately familiar with feeling not good enough. Bryan said, you because of economic circumstances, me because of impossible standards, different manifestations of the same wound. When did you get so insightful? Therapy. Turns out, when you actually examine your life instead of just surviving it, you learn things. Maybe I should try that. The words slipped out unintentionally, but Bryan latched onto them. You should. Therapy changed my life. Made me understand patterns I'd been repeating without realizing. Gave me tools to handle difficulty without shutting down. I don't have trauma. I just had a bad breakup. Sara, you experienced abandonment at a formative moment. Lost your scholarship. Had to drop out of school. Fell into clinical depression. That's textbook trauma. The fact that you built something incredible afterward doesn't erase what you went through. Maybe. She wasn't ready to fully admit he was right, but the seed was planted. 2 months into their renewed connection, something shifted. Sara couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but suddenly Bryan wasn't just her former lover or her business partner or even her friend. He was the person she thought about first thing in the morning, the one she wanted to share good news with, the one whose opinion mattered when she was making decisions. It terrified her. I'm getting too comfortable with him, she told Melissa over lunch. Is that a bad thing? It is when history suggests he's going to disappear and destroy me again. Has he given you any indication he's going to do that? No, he's been completely consistent. Shows up when he says he will. Follows through on commitments. Communicates clearly. But that almost makes it worse because I'm starting to trust him again, and trust is dangerous. Or trust is necessary for any meaningful relationship. I don't need a meaningful relationship. I need to protect myself. From what? From being happy? From letting someone close? Sara, you've spent 5 years building walls. At some point, you have to decide if those walls are protection or prison. Before Sara could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Bryan. Emergency at the hospital foundation. One of our major donors is pulling funding. Can we postpone dinner tonight? I'm sorry. Sara stared at the message, feeling her protective instincts activate. This was it, the beginning of him pulling away, canceling plans, prioritizing other things, the pattern starting again. But then another message came through. Actually, forget that. The donor can wait. I made a commitment to you, and I'm keeping it. See you at 7. Followed immediately by a third message. Unless you want to postpone? I don't want to be distracted during dinner, if you'd rather reschedule when I can be fully present. Sara felt something crack in her chest. He was asking, communicating, giving her the choice while making it clear she was the priority. She typed back, handle the donor. These things matter. We can reschedule. You're sure? I'm sure. Go save your funding. Thank you for understanding. Tomorrow night instead? Same place? Tomorrow works. The next evening, Bryan showed up with flowers. Not an elaborate bouquet designed to impress, just simple wildflowers that somehow felt more personal than roses. For being understanding about last night, he handed them to her. I know I canceled and you graciously let me handle the crisis, but I wanted you to know I didn't take that for granted. How did it go with the donor? Managed to salvage it. Turns out he was upset about something unrelated and taking it out on the foundation. We talked through it. Funding is secure. Over dinner, Sara made a decision. She was tired of protecting herself. Tired of holding Bryan at arm's length when everything in her wanted to let him closer. Tired of punishing him for something he'd done 5 years ago when he'd spent the last 2 months proving he'd changed. Can I tell you something? She set down her wine glass, meeting his eyes. Of course. I've been terrified of you since the moment I walked into your office 2 months ago. Terrified you'd hurt me again. Terrified I'd let you. Terrified that all this growth you're showing is temporary and you'll revert to the man who disappeared. But Bryan, I'm even more terrified of spending the rest of my life closed off because of something that happened when we were both different people. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we could try something, not rushing into anything, not picking up where we left off 5 years ago, but actually getting to know each other as the people we are now. See if there's something real here, or if we're just nostalgic for what might have been. Bryan's face transformed into something between hope and disbelief. You want to date me? Like actually give this a real chance? I want to try, slowly, with communication and boundaries and the understanding that if it doesn't work, we can walk away without destroying each other. Sara, I would like nothing more than to try this with you, but I need you to know something first. He reached across the table, took her hand carefully. I'm not doing this casually. I'm not interested in seeing where it goes or keeping things light. I'm in love with you, not the memory of who you were, but who you are now. This brilliant, fierce, uncompromising woman who built an empire from heartbreak and demands authenticity from everyone around her. Bryan, her voice caught. I've been in love with you since about 2 weeks into these dinners. When you called me out for using corporate speak to avoid a real answer, you wouldn't let me hide behind polished language or performance. You demanded the real me, and that made me want to give you everything real I had to offer. He squeezed her hand. So yes, I want to try this. I want to show up for you every single day and prove that I'm not the man who left, that I've learned how to stay, that I can be the partner you deserve. Sara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I'm scared. I know. So am I. But Sara, I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. If we do this, you have to promise me something. No disappearing. No matter what happens, grief, stress, crisis, you stay and we face it together. I need your word. You have my word. I stay. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I've learned that running from difficulty just makes it worse. I won't run from you again. Okay? She took a shaky breath. Okay. Let's try this. Their first real date, not business dinner or friendly catch-up, but actual date, happened the following weekend. Bryan picked her up from her apartment, visibly nervous in a way that made him seem younger. You look beautiful, he said when she answered the door in a green dress she'd bought specifically for tonight. You look terrified. I am. I want this to go well. It's dinner and a movie. Pretty low stakes. It's our first date in 5 years. That feels high stakes to me. He drove them to a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood Sara didn't know. Family-owned, unpretentious, the kind of place that prioritized good food over Instagram-worthy presentation. How did you find this place? My therapist recommended it. Said I needed to start frequenting places where I could be myself instead of the CEO version of myself. This place doesn't care who I am or how much money I have. They just make incredible pasta. Over dinner, they played a question game, taking turns asking things they didn't know about each other, favorite books, biggest fears, childhood dreams, what they'd do if money wasn't a factor. I'd probably still do exactly what I'm doing, Sara admitted. Building security software feels meaningful, like I'm protecting people from vulnerability. That's very on brand for someone who spent 5 years protecting herself from vulnerability. I'm working on that, I know. And I'm grateful you're willing to be vulnerable with me after what I did. Their second date was a hike. Bryan's suggestion, claiming he wanted to do something active where they could talk without the formality of restaurant settings. They spent 4 hours walking, through forests, discussing everything from politics to philosophy to the ethics of artificial intelligence. You challenge me, Bryan said as they sat on an overlook eating the lunch he'd packed. Make me think harder than I have to in most conversations. Is that a compliment? The highest one I know how to give. Most people in my life tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me what you actually think, even when it contradicts me. Especially when it contradicts me. By their 5th date, Sara had stopped counting, stopped marking this as experimental or temporary. They'd fallen into something that felt sustainable, real, built on honest communication and mutual respect, and the hard-won understanding that both of them had to choose this every day. 3 months into officially dating, Bryan asked her to stay over, not for sex, just to sleep beside each other, to wake up together in a way they hadn't since that one disastrous night 5 years ago. Sara almost said no. The memory of waking alone was too fresh, too painful. But she was trying to be brave, trying to trust. Okay, but Bryan, if I wake up alone, that's it. We're done. I won't survive that twice. I'll be here. I promise. If I have to leave for any reason, I'll wake you first and explain. You won't be alone. She stayed, slept in his arms in the same bed where he'd taken her virginity 5 years ago, except now the context was completely different. They were different. This wasn't desperate hope. This was cautious trust. When she woke at dawn, Bryan was still there. Awake, actually, watching her sleep. How long have you been up? About an hour. I wanted to make sure you didn't wake up alone. Figured staying awake was safer than risking sleeping through your alarm. You've been lying here for an hour just watching me sleep. That's a little creepy. I prefer to think of it as devoted. He smiled, pushing hair out of her face. Good morning, Sara. Good morning. She said it like a revelation, like those 2 words meant something more than just a greeting. Like they meant he'd kept his promise. Like they meant maybe this was real. Before we go any further, I need to pause and talk to you directly. Because what you're watching isn't just a love story. It's a story about what happens when someone does the actual work of changing, when trauma gets processed instead of buried, when 2 broken people choose to build something together instead of staying safe and alone. If you believe in second chances, if you think people can genuinely transform, if you've ever had to decide whether to risk your heart again after someone broke it, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, because Mr. Dalton's Story House is dedicated to stories about real transformation. Messy, complicated, hard-won change that doesn't happen overnight, but is worth every difficult moment. Drop a comment and tell me where you stand. Would you give Bryan a second chance? Have you ever been Sara, learning to trust again after betrayal? Share this video with someone who needs to believe that broken things can be rebuilt into something even stronger than the original. Because here's the truth we don't talk about enough. Forgiveness isn't weakness. Giving someone another chance after they've proven they've changed isn't naive. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is risk being hurt again, because the alternative is living your whole life behind walls that keep out pain, but also keep out joy. Now let's get back to Sara and Bryan, because they're about to face the real test. 4 months into their relationship, Sara's company received a massive acquisition offer. A tech giant wanted to buy Mitchell Tech for $200 million. Life-changing money. The kind of success that would cement her legacy and prove once and for all that she'd transcended her circumstances. But it would mean moving to California for at least 2 years to oversee the integration. Leaving Seattle, leaving Bryan. Exactly when they were building something real. She told him over dinner at his place, watching his face carefully for any sign of how he'd react. $200 million, he repeated, clearly stunned. Sara, that's incredible. That's validation of everything you've built. It is. You don't sound excited, because it means leaving. 2 years minimum in San Francisco, and we've only been doing this for 4 months. I don't know if what we have is strong enough to survive that. Bryan was quiet for a long moment, processing. What do you want to do? Not what you think you should do or what makes strategic sense. What does your gut tell you? My gut says I've spent 5 years building this company to prove I'm more than what you did to me. And now that I've proven it, now that I have the success I fought for, I don't want to leave the person I built it all to forget. She hadn't meant to say that. Hadn't meant to admit that her empire had been constructed as much from heartbreak as ambition. So, this company, everything you've achieved, it was about me. It was about proving I didn't need you. That I was valuable whether you chose me or not. That my worth wasn't dependent on anyone's validation. And now you've proven all of that. You're worth $200 million. The market has quantified your brilliance. So what happens now? I don't know. Taking this offer makes financial sense. But Bryan, I just got you back. I'm not ready to lose you again. You won't lose me. Long-distance relationships work for people who are committed. Do they, though? We're barely 4 months in. That's not enough foundation to survive 2 years apart. Then don't go. The words were simple, but Sara heard everything underneath them. The hope, the fear, the vulnerability of asking her to choose him. I can't not go. This is $200 million. This is everything I worked for. No, it's not. It's money. It's a lot of money, and it's incredible validation. But Sara, is it everything? Is your company actually what matters most? Or is it what you convinced yourself to prioritize because relationships felt dangerous? That's not fair, isn't it? You built Mitchell Tech as armor, proof that you didn't need anyone. and you succeeded brilliantly. But at some point, you have to decide if that armor is still serving you or if it's keeping you from the life you actually want. What life do I actually want? I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you what I want. I want you here. I want to keep building this relationship. I want morning coffee and late-night conversations and the chance to prove that I can show up for you day after day, year after year for the rest of our lives. He paused, his voice going quieter. But I also want you to be happy. And if this acquisition is what makes you happy, if the success and validation matter more than what we're building, then you should take it. I'll support you. We'll figure out long distance or we'll acknowledge that we tried and it wasn't the right timing. Either way, I won't disappear again. You'll know exactly where I stand. Sara felt tears starting to fall. She'd spent 5 years convinced she didn't need anyone. That independence was the only safety. That success could substitute for connection. But sitting across from Bryan, she realized that all her achievements felt hollow compared to the simple joy of being known and chosen by someone who'd seen her at her worst and her best and wanted her anyway. What if I turned down the acquisition? What if you did? Would that be stupid? Walking away from $200 million for a relationship that might not even work? I can't tell you what's stupid or smart. But I can tell you that in 5 years of therapy, the thing I've learned most is that money can't buy the things that actually make life meaningful. Connection, purpose, love. Those require vulnerability and presence and showing up even when it's hard. I'm scared that if I choose you over this opportunity, I'll regret it. That we'll break up in 6 months and I'll have given up everything for nothing. That's possible. There are no guarantees. But Sara, you'll also regret it if you choose money over love and spend the next 2 years alone in San Francisco wondering what we could have built together. Why are you being so calm about this? You should be fighting harder for me to stay. I am fighting for you. I'm fighting by telling you the truth instead of manipulating you. I'm fighting by trusting you to make the decision that's right for you. I'm fighting by promising that whatever you choose, I'll respect it and support it even if it breaks my heart. Sara cried then. Full breakdown. 5 years of walls crumbling. Bryan held her, didn't try to fix it or rush her through it, just held her while she processed everything she'd been avoiding. I don't want the acquisition. She finally whispered against his shoulder. I thought I did. I thought that level of success would finally make me feel like I'd won, like I'd proven everyone wrong. But Bryan, I don't want to spend 2 years in California being professionally successful and personally alone. I want this. Us. The life we're building. Are you sure? Because Sara, if you turn this down and resent me for it later, that will destroy us just as surely as distance would. I'm sure. I'll counteroffer. Sell them the encryption protocols, but retain Mitchell Tech as an independent entity. They get the technology they want. I get a substantial payout, and I stay in Seattle. Best of both worlds. That's a brilliant compromise. I'm a brilliant woman. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. It's taken me 5 years to remember that my intelligence isn't just about building armor. It's also about building a life worth living. They got engaged 6 months later. Nothing dramatic. Just Bryan asking over breakfast one morning if she wanted to make this permanent. Sara saying yes before he'd even finished the question. The wedding was small. Close friends, a few family members. Sara's mother crying in the front row, proud of the daughter who'd survived everything and chosen joy anyway. Bryan's mother, recovered from her breakdown years ago, welcoming Sara like the daughter she'd never had. Standing at the altar, Sara remembered that night 5 years ago, whispering you were my hope into Bryan's skin while crying from overwhelm and vulnerability and trust. She'd meant it differently then. Hope as rescue. Hope as escape from circumstances. Hope as someone else validating her worth. Now, saying vows in front of people who loved them. Hope meant something else entirely. Hope as partnership. Hope as two people choosing each other while standing on their own feet. Hope as the belief that broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger than the original. I promise to stay, Bryan said in his vows. When things get hard, when grief or stress or crisis hits, when you're angry or hurt or scared, I promise to communicate instead of shutting down, to ask for help instead of shouldering everything alone, to choose us every single day for the rest of our life together. Sara's vows were simpler. You were my hope once, then you were my devastation, then you were my second chance. Now you're just mine, my partner, my best friend, the person I choose above every acquisition offer and professional opportunity, and protective wall I could possibly build. I choose you. Every day. No matter what. They honeymooned in Italy. 2 weeks of actual vacation where Bryan didn't check email and Sara didn't think about code. Just two people being present with each other, building memories that had nothing to do with business or success or proving anything to anyone. One night in Rome, sitting at an outdoor cafe watching people pass by, Bryan asked her a question. Are you happy? The same question he'd asked in his office 8 months ago, but everything was different now. I'm happy, Sara said with certainty. Not just content or successful. Actually happy. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was still armored. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove I'd changed. For being brave enough to risk your heart again. A year into marriage, Sara started therapy, finally addressing the trauma she'd insisted wasn't trauma. Working through abandonment issues and the belief that she had to earn love through achievement. Learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness and that being needed didn't mean losing herself. Bryan sat in on one session at the therapist's suggestion. Couples work, examining their patterns and blind spots. You still protect yourself sometimes. The therapist observed to Sara. When things get emotionally intense, you retreat into work or logic. What are you afraid of? That he'll leave again. That I'll wake up alone. That this is all temporary and I'll be destroyed when it ends. Bryan reached for her hand. I'm not going anywhere. How many times do I have to prove that? It's not about you proving it. The therapist interjected. It's about Sara internalizing a new truth, that she's worth staying for. That love doesn't have to be earned through perfection. That she can be messy and difficult and human and still be cherished. Is that true? Sara asked Bryan directly, tears in her eyes. Can I be messy and you'll still stay? Especially then. Sara, I don't love you because you're perfect. I love you because you're real. Because you challenge me and make me better and refuse to let me hide from myself. That doesn't disappear when things get hard. 2 years into marriage, they bought a house together. Not Bryan's penthouse or Sara's apartment, but a place they chose jointly. Filled it with furniture they picked out together. Created a home that belonged to both of them equally. Sara's company continued thriving. The partial sale of her encryption protocols had netted her $80 million, and Mitchell Tech remained independent and growing. She'd proven everything she needed to prove. But more importantly, she'd built a life that mattered beyond just professional success. Board game nights with friends, Sunday dinners with family, volunteering at Bryan's hospital foundation, morning coffee with her husband discussing everything and nothing. 5 years after walking back into Bryan's office, Sara stood in that same conference room for a meeting about expanding their business partnership. But this time, she wasn't armored, wasn't terrified, wasn't trying to prove anything. This time she was just herself, successful and vulnerable, strong and soft, complete on her own and better with her partner. After the meeting, Bryan pulled her aside. Do you remember standing here 5 years ago? You were so angry, so hurt, so determined to prove you didn't need me. I remember. I wanted you to see what you'd lost, to regret leaving me. Do I regret it? Every day. But Bryan, I also know that we both needed those 5 years. Me to build myself into someone who could stand on her own. You to do the work of becoming someone capable of healthy partnership. If we'd stayed together back then, we might have destroyed each other. And now we build each other up. That's the difference. The final scene of their story happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing dramatic or cinematic. Just Sara and Bryan cooking dinner together in their kitchen. Music playing. Wine poured. Easy conversation about work and plans for the weekend, and whether they should adopt a dog. Sara looked at Bryan chopping vegetables and felt overwhelming gratitude. Not because he'd rescued her, not because he'd validated her worth, but because he'd given her the space to rescue herself, then chosen to build a life beside her. You were my hope. She said it out loud, the words that had defined their beginning. Bryan looked up, understanding immediately what she meant. Past tense? No, present tense, but different now. You're not my hope for escape or validation or rescue. You're my hope that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be permanent, that love can be rebuilt into something even stronger than the original. You're my hope too. He set down the knife, pulled her close. That broken things can be fixed, that I can be better than I was, that showing up every day matters more than grand gestures. They stood there in their kitchen, Two people who destroyed each other and rebuilt themselves and chosen to build something together. No longer defined by the worst thing that happened to them, but by every choice they'd made since to be better. Sara thought about that 22-year-old girl crying in Bryan's bed, whispering that he was her hope. She wanted to tell that girl that she'd survive, that the heartbreak would forge her into someone extraordinary, that she'd build an empire and find love, and learn that her worth had never been dependent on anyone choosing her. But she also wanted to tell that girl that it was okay to hope, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that giving someone your trust and having them destroy it didn't mean you should never trust again. It just meant you learned to trust more carefully, more intentionally, with people who'd proven through consistent action that they deserved it. The ending came not with fireworks or dramatic declarations, just with dinner in a kitchen they'd chosen together, just with conversation about ordinary things that felt extraordinary because they'd fought so hard for ordinary, just with love that had been destroyed and rebuilt, and was somehow stronger for having survived its own breaking. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ends with happily ever choosing vulnerability over armor, choosing communication over silence, choosing each other every single day with full knowledge of exactly how much that choice costs and exactly how much it's worth. And that, more than any fairy tale ending, is what real love looks like. Here's what I need you to understand before we end. This story isn't really about Sara and Bryan. It's about you, about every person who's ever been broken by someone they trusted, every person who built walls to feel safe, every person who had to choose between staying protected and risking their heart again. The moral isn't that you should forgive everyone who hurt you. It isn't that all relationships deserve second chances. Some betrayals are unforgivable. Some people don't change. Some walls are necessary for survival. But the moral is this: don't let one person's failure to choose you convince you that you're not worth choosing. Don't build such strong armor that nothing can hurt you, but nothing can reach you either. Don't punish everyone in your future for what someone in your past did to you. Sara could have stayed angry forever, could have used her success as a weapon to prove Bryan wrong, could have kept him at a distance even when he showed up consistently for months. Instead, she chose to be brave, to risk being hurt again, because the alternative was living her whole life, half open, half alive, half hoping for something more. And Bryan could have accepted her professional boundaries and left it there, could have decided that proving himself was too hard or too uncertain, could have protected himself from the possibility of rejection. Instead, he chose to do the actual work: therapy, self-examination, consistent action over empty promises, showing up day after day, even when the outcome was uncertain. Both of them chose courage over comfort. Both of them chose growth over stagnation. Both of them chose to believe that people can change and broken things can heal, and second chances are possible when both people are willing to do the work. That's the lesson. Not that love conquers all, or that romance solves problems, or that you should trust blindly and hope for the best. The lesson is that healing is possible, that you can be both strong enough to survive alone and brave enough to build with someone else, that your worth isn't determined by who stays or leaves, but by how you rebuild after devastation. If this story resonated with you, if you see yourself in Sara's journey from devastation to empowerment to cautious hope, do me a favor right now. Smash that like button. Let me know this story spoke to you. Subscribe to Mr. Dalton Storyhouse and turn on notifications. This channel is dedicated to stories about real transformation, messy second chances, and the truth that you are never too broken to build something beautiful. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that survival isn't the end goal. Joy is, connection is, love is. Share it with someone who's learning to take off armor they built for protection but no longer needs. Share it with someone who's deciding whether to risk their heart again. And comment below. Tell me your story. Are you Sara, rebuilding from heartbreak? Are you Bryan, trying to prove you've changed? Are you somewhere in between, figuring out if people really can transform? Your story matters. Your healing matters. Your choice to be brave matters. Remember this: you are not defined by who left you. You are defined by how you rebuilt. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the people who broke you can become partners in building something stronger than the original. But only if both people are willing to do the work. Only if both people choose courage. Only if both people show up every single day and prove through action that they mean what they say. Until next time, keep fighting. Keep building. Keep believing you deserve more than just survival. You deserve joy. You deserve partnership. You deserve to be chosen by someone who proves through consistent action that you matter. And most importantly, choose yourself every single day. Whether someone else chooses you or not, that's the real happy ending.